The rain on Aerolith wasn't like Earth's. On Earth, storms washed the air clean. Here, the drops struck like shards of glass, cold enough to sting, bitter enough to taste metal on the tongue. Even the proud nobles scurried beneath crystal awnings, and guards wrapped their cloaks tight, cursing as the water hissed against their armor. That was why no one noticed the children. Two small figures huddled beneath a broken archway, shivering, soaked to the bone. Their eyes glowed faintly in the half-light, the mark of their alien bloodline, but their faces were gaunt with hunger and fear. Passers-by quickened their pace, not daring to look. Strays were someone else's problem. Except for the human. He slowed when he saw them. His boots splashed through ankle-deep water as he crossed the street, drawing a few sneers from the merchants who watched. Figures, one muttered. Humans can't resist picking up strays. The human ignored them. He knelt in the mud, the storm soaking through his shirt, and shrugged off his cloak. Without a word, he draped it over the children's shoulders. They flinched at first, then leaned into the sudden warmth, trembling less. "Easy," he said softly, his voice almost lost in the roar of the rain. "You're safe now." The smaller one clutched the cloak tight. The older child stared up at him with wide, distrustful eyes, as though she couldn't decide if he was a fool or a miracle. And all around, the city kept moving, blind to the moment that would shake its throne. His name was Daniel Hayes, 32, from the Pacific Northwest of Earth, a medic by training, though these days he scraped by repairing engines on trade docks. He'd seen storms before, but never one like this. The rain left his lips raw, left burns on exposed skin if he lingered too long. Even the locals avoided it when they could. But the children had no choice. Daniel crouched lower to see their faces under the hood of his cloak. Their cheeks were sunken, their lips cracked. Both had bluish skin beneath the natural luminescent glow of their kind, a sign of cold stress, maybe hypothermia. He spoke carefully. "Can you walk?" The older girl didn't answer. Her teeth chattered too hard. The younger whimpered, pulling the cloak tighter. Daniel didn't wait for permission. He slipped his arm under the smaller one, lifting her easily against his chest. She was frighteningly light. The older one clung to his sleeve without thinking. From across the street, a guard laughed. "Look at that. Human thinks he's a saint." "Better off leaving them," another jeered. "Strays never pay back kindness." Daniel didn't even look at them. He shifted the girl in his arms, adjusted the cloak to cover both, and started toward the nearest covered path. The storm followed him like a living thing. They reached the ruined tram shed on the east side of the market. The roof sagged, but it held. Daniel set the younger girl down carefully and struck a small heating unit to life. Its orange glow pushed the shadows back. The older child watched him with sharp suspicion, body coiled as though ready to run. Daniel didn't push. He pulled a ration bar from his pack, broke it in half, and held it out. "You eat first," he said. She hesitated, then snatched it, breaking it again to hand the smaller piece to her sister. They chewed slowly, like every bite mattered. Daniel leaned back against the wall, wringing out his sleeves. "That storm will last the night. Best we stay here until it breaks." The younger girl looked at him finally. Her voice was no louder than the rain on the roof. "Why did you stop?" "Because you needed help," Daniel said simply. The older child frowned. "No one stops." "I'm not no one." They blinked at him, uncertain whether to believe him. Hours passed. The rain hammered harder. Daniel told them stories to keep them awake, because cold like this could pull you under if you let it. He spoke of Earth, not the wars, not the endless noise of the cities, but small things. The way apple trees bloomed white in spring. The sound of baseball bats cracking under summer sun. The younger girl giggled once, a fragile sound. The older one shushed her quickly, but Daniel caught the flicker of a smile. When they finally dozed against him, he checked their pulses with 2 fingers at their wrists, weak but steady, skin still cool. They'd need warm fluids and dry clothes by morning. He made a mental list of what he had in his pack: 2 water pouches, half a med kit, 1 fever strip. Not much, enough to keep them stable for a night. He closed his eyes, listening to the storm rage, and wondered what kind of world left children outside in this. Dawn came gray and heavy. The storm eased, though the streets still ran with dirty rivers. Shouts carried through the mist. "Search the alleys. Find them. Daniel stiffened. The children woke, clutching his arms. Soldiers marched past the shed, banners snapping wet in the wind. Their insignia was unmistakable, the Empress's guard. Lost heirs, someone whispered nearby. The palace brats. They're alive. Daniel looked at the girls, their eyes widened, fear mixing with something else. Recognition. Stay quiet, he whispered. But it was too late. One soldier turned, peering into the shed. His gaze landed on Daniel, soaked and muddy, with two small figures clutching his cloak. And in that instant, the world shifted. The strays weren't strays at all. They were the Empress's daughters. The soldier froze in the doorway, rain dripping from the edge of his helmet. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Daniel instinctively shifted, pulling the girls closer against him. The soldier's eyes widened. He opened his mouth, but before he could call out, one of the girls let out a tiny whimper, the younger one. Her voice broke through the morning air like glass. The soldier stumbled backward. I found them. The words exploded into the street. Boots thundered. Dozens of armored figures converged on the shed. The clatter of rifles, the hiss of comm units. Bystanders pressed against walls, whispering. Daniel rose slowly, his arms around the children. Easy, he murmured. It's all right. But the girls clung tighter. The older one buried her face against his sleeve, trembling. The younger's thin fingers dug into his shirt like claws. The first rank of soldiers halted at the threshold. None dared step inside. Their captain, marked by a crimson sash, lowered his weapons slowly. His voice was tight. By order of the Empress, surrender the children immediately. Daniel kept his tone even. They're freezing. They need heat and fluids before anything else. You will obey. They won't survive another hour in this state, Daniel said flatly. Check their pulse if you don't believe me. The soldiers shifted uneasily. This wasn't the defiance they expected. The captain's jaw worked as he weighed the risk. Finally, he gestured sharply. Two medics rushed forward, scanning the girls with handheld devices. One of them muttered, "Core temps low, early hypothermia, electrolyte imbalance, malnourishment too." The captain's expression cracked. "Get them secured. Now." The medics pulled out thermal wraps, but when they tried to take the girls, the children shrieked. Not words, just pure terror. They twisted back into Daniel's arms, refusing to let go. The watching crowd gasped. Soldiers exchanged looks. Even the captain hesitated. Daniel crouched again, meeting the girl's eyes. "Listen to me. They're here to help. I won't leave you, all right? You have my word." The older one whispered hoarsely, "Don't let go." "I won't," he promised. He stood, keeping one arm around each child as the medics worked. They wrapped them both in silver sheets, slipped rehydration tabs under their tongues. Daniel stayed steady, letting the children cling to his soaked shirt until their trembling eased. The storm outside had ended, but in the streets, chaos was only beginning. By noon, the news had spread like fire through dry fields. The Empress's daughters, thought lost in the palace ambush 3 months earlier, had been found alive, found in the arms of a human. Crowds gathered as Daniel was escorted through the city. Some stared in silence, some whispered insults. Figures. Human scavenger probably used them for pity coin. Or sold them to slavers and now pretends he's a hero. Pathetic. Kneeling in the mud for strays. Daniel didn't answer. He kept walking, one step at a time, the children clutching his hands. The palace loomed ahead, all glass towers and carved stone, glistening wet from the storm. Soldiers swung the gates open. Inside, warmth and light poured out, almost painful after the gray streets. The girls' grips tightened, their breaths quickened. Daniel bent slightly. "It's all right, just a few more steps." They nodded, but didn't release him. Inside the palace's great hall, the spectacle reached its peak. Nobles in jeweled collars crowded the balconies. Advisors whispered frantically. The air was heavy with perfume and suspicion. At the far end of the hall, on a throne of obsidian and silver, sat the Empress. Her presence filled the chamber more than the towering columns or the guards flanking her dais. When her eyes fell on the children, the hall went still. The younger one gasped and broke free, not to flee, but to run. Straight across the polished floor, straight into her mother's arms. The Empress caught her with a sound that was neither laugh nor sob, just raw release. The older one hesitated. She looked at Daniel first, eyes searching. He gave a small nod. Only then did she walk forward, though when the Empress knelt to embrace her, she still held Daniel's hand, dragging him the last few steps. The nobles erupted in shocked whispers. The Empress didn't silence them. She was too busy pressing her daughters close, tears streaking her face. When at last she looked up, her gaze landed on Daniel. "You," she said, her voice shaking. "You brought them back." Daniel stood awkwardly, soaked, mud still caked on his boots. "I just stopped in the rain," he said. "They were cold." The nobles laughed at that. Harsh, bitter laughter. One called out, "He admits it. He thinks himself noble for feeding gutter spawn." The Empress rose to her full height, her daughters still clinging to her. Her voice cut through the noise like a blade. Silence. The chamber obeyed. She looked at Daniel again, eyes bright with something fierce. "He saw children where you saw nothing. Remember that." The Empress's words hung in the air like a commandment carved in stone. No one dared breathe too loud. The nobles shifted, their jeweled collars glinting, their lips tight with swallowed protest. Daniel stood awkwardly in the center of the hall, the girl's small hands still tangled in his. His shirt was stiff with dried rain, his boots left dirty prints across the polished floor, and every eye watched him like he didn't belong. The Empress finally gestured. "Bring him forward." The guards hesitated, then stepped aside. Daniel walked the length of the hall, the children clinging, as if afraid someone would tear him away. When he reached the dais, the Empress herself came down from the throne. It startled the court more than any outburst could have. Up close, Daniel saw how tired she looked beneath her composure lines etched deeper than her portraits, eyes hollowed by sleepless nights. But when she glanced at her daughters, light returned to her face. She turned back to him. "Tell me exactly what happened." Daniel cleared his throat. His voice was rough, not used to addressing rulers. "I saw them in the rain. Nobody else stopped. They were soaked through, shaking. I gave them my cloak, carried the younger when she couldn't walk, brought them to shelter, made a fire, kept them awake. That's all." "That is not all," the Empress said, her tone sharp. "You kept them alive when others would have walked past." A noblewoman in the front row scoffed. "He expects gratitude for doing what any medic might?" Daniel looked up at her, calm. "Any medic didn't, I did." The chamber murmured at his bluntness. The Empress's mouth twitched, almost a smile. The palace healers were summoned. The children were examined right there in the hall, screens pulled aside for privacy. Daniel stayed close, refusing to move farther than a few steps. The chief healer emerged after nearly an hour, his hands clasped behind his back. Both show signs of prolonged malnutrition, electrolyte deficiencies, old injuries, partially healed without proper care. The younger's lungs are still recovering from repeated respiratory infections. The elder has a rib fracture that knit unevenly. Gasps rippled through the nobles. Daniel clenched his jaw. He had suspected as much when he felt the uneven rise of her chest against his arm in the shed. The healer continued. "Immediate treatment will stabilize them, but recovery will take months, possibly years. They survived only through sheer resilience and the intervention of this man." The Empress's gaze swept the balconies. "You heard. My daughters endured suffering beneath your very walls. None of you found them. He did." An older minister raised his staff, his voice trembling with indignation. "Your Majesty, it is improper to praise an outsider for performing what should have been the duty of your own subjects. He acted out of foolish sentiment, not strength." Daniel met his eyes. "If it's foolish to keep 2 children alive, I'll take the name gladly." The younger princess tugged his sleeve, whispering too loudly for the hall to miss. "Not foolish. Brave." The crowd fell into uneasy silence. That night, Daniel wasn't dismissed to the streets. The Empress herself ordered quarters prepared for him near the royal wing. Simple rooms, but dry, with a real bed and clean clothes. The girls refused to sleep until he promised to stay nearby. He sat at their bedside until they drifted off, one hand resting lightly over the smaller one's blanket. When he finally stepped into the corridor, 2 guards waited, not hostile, but wary. One of them muttered, "You changed the court today. Daniel shook his head. I didn't change anything, I just gave them bread and warmth. The guard studied him a moment longer. Sometimes that changes everything. The following morning brought the mockery full circle. As Daniel entered the hall again, some nobles whispered behind their hands. Street feeder. Soft-hearted human. Unworthy of palace honor. But the whispers faltered as soon as the girls came in, walking with their mother, and broke from her side to seize Daniel's hands. The older one lifted her chin defiantly at the balconies. He kept us alive, she said loudly, her small voice echoing in the vaulted chamber. When you didn't. Not a single noble dared reply. The Empress raised her staff. The court will reconvene tomorrow. Tonight we honor what was lost and found. Daniel looked down at the girls. Their hands were still warm in his, and for the first time since the storm, he let himself breathe. The palace bells tolled at dusk, their deep tones rolling across the city like thunder. Word had already spread through every market and back alley. The lost princesses had returned. Lanterns lit in celebration, though some burned more in curiosity than joy. After all, the Empire had not expected a human at the center of the tale. Daniel sat quietly in the chamber he had been given. It still felt borrowed, its tapestries too heavy, its cushions too soft. He'd scrubbed his boots clean, but the mud seemed stubborn, as if it wanted to remind him where he had come from. A knock came. He opened the door to find the Empress herself, flanked by 2 guards. Her daughters darted past them immediately, Shay climbing onto the couch, Alari tugging Daniel toward the hearth. They wanted to see you before the feast, the Empress said. Daniel smiled faintly. I'm not much for feasts. They're not for you, they're for them. Her eyes softened as she watched the girls laughing together, the warmth of firelight brushing away the shadows that had clung to them. Still, her voice carried steel when she turned back to him. You know the court isn't finished. They will press me tomorrow. They'll want to know why a man with no bloodline, no title, no station, was allowed into the heart of the palace. Daniel leaned against the wall. And what will you tell them? That you succeeded where they all failed. The feast hall that night gleamed with crystal lamps and silver dishes. Musicians played softly, their notes weaving under the chatter of nobles who dared not speak too loud. Soldiers lined the walls, banners hanging heavy with the Empire's crest. When the Empress entered with her daughters, silence fell. The children wore simple gowns, their hair still uneven from years of neglect, but they walked with pride. At their side was Daniel, uncomfortable in the formal tunic they had pressed into his hands, but steady all the same. The Empress raised her staff. Tonight, we give thanks not to armies or crowns, but to life itself. My daughters breathe because one man chose to see them not as strays, but as children. Daniel Hayes, stand. He rose slowly. The court's eyes burned into him. The Empress continued, her voice echoing against the vaulted ceiling. When the storm raged, he gave them shelter. When hunger gnawed, he gave them bread. When fear swallowed them, he gave them laughter. He showed them a strength that this empire has forgotten. Compassion. Also, a murmur rippled through the nobles. Some nodded reluctantly, others scowled, but none dared speak against her. Daniel cleared his throat. I didn't do anything extraordinary. Any of you could have stopped. I just did. The Empress looked out over the hall. Yes, and that is the truth you must carry. That sometimes the smallest choice, the moment when you kneel to help, carries the weight of kingdoms. The girls darted forward then, ignoring protocol, and seized Daniel's hands in front of everyone. He's ours, Alari declared. He saved us. He stays. Laughter rippled from the balconies, not mocking this time, but startled, genuine amusement. Even the Empress let her stern mask slip into a smile. The days that followed reshaped the city. The stray children of the alleys were no longer hunted or ignored. They were gathered, sheltered, given food and care. Clinics opened where there had been none. The nobles grumbled at the expense, but they dared not defy the precedent set by the royal heirs. Daniel worked alongside the palace healers. He showed them how to rewarm cold bodies safely, to use gradual hydration for malnourished children, rather than drowning their fragile systems. He stitched minor wounds, set broken fingers, taught younger apprentices to listen more than they spoke. One night, as he checked Shay's rib healing progress with careful hands, the Empress entered quietly. "You've become their anchor," she said. "They don't need an anchor," Daniel replied. "They need time. And you'll give it to them." He didn't argue. He couldn't. Weeks turned to months. The storm season passed, but the memory of that night never left. Shay grew stronger, her laughter ringing through the palace gardens. Ellery's cough lessened with treatment, her eyes brighter each day. They still clung to Daniel's hands when crowds pressed too close, but they walked taller now. On the morning of the first spring bloom, the Empress summoned the court once more. "The empire measures strength by crowns, by armies, by bloodlines," she said. "But strength is also found in a soaked cloak, shared in the rain, in bread broken with trembling hands, in the stubbornness to see worth where others turn away." She turned to Daniel. "This man will not be given a title he does not want, nor chains of duty he did not ask for. But he will walk beside my daughters as protector, not by decree, but by their choice. And so long as they hold his hands, he is welcome in this court." The nobles bowed, whether in respect or in fear of her will. The children beamed. Daniel exhaled slowly. He hadn't asked for honor, he hadn't asked for place. But he had given what he could in the storm, and now, somehow, that simple act had shifted an empire. That evening, he sat once more by the fire in the small chamber near the royal wing. Shay leaned against his shoulder, Ilari curled against his lap. Their breaths deepened into sleep, steady and safe. Daniel stared at the flames and thought of that night, the shards of rain, the broken awning, the sneers of passers-by. He had stopped because he couldn't keep walking. Because, in his bones, children were never strays. They were simply children. And now, those hands he had covered with a cloak in the rain clung to his still, not out of desperation, but out of choice. Outside, the city lights burned. Inside, the fire crackled. The empire would remember banners and proclamations, but Daniel knew the truth. It had never been about thrones. It had been about stopping in the rain. And that was enough.